It is Wednesday, 31st of January 2024. Damn, where's January gone? This video is in response to the one I put out a couple of weeks ago titled, Is God Really Good? And all I can really say is, wow. Oh my days. Nothing could have prepared me for the amount of response that I got to that video. To say it set the cat among the pigeons is the understatement of the millennium, it would seem, in my world at least. So in 2020, April, I put out my now infamous car rant, which really put me on the map for a lot of people. It was me venting my frustration through vitriol about the convid nonsense that we'd all just found ourselves plunged into. And that video went, I suppose you would say viral, excuse the pun, and it generated a whole load of attention towards my work and a whole load of correspondence was sent in my direction. This video causes that one to pale into relative insignificance in terms of the volume of correspondence and responses that this has received. It's been literally hundreds, I haven't actually counted them, it might be into the thousands in terms of direct messages that I've had through my Proton Mail and my Gmail and also Facebook. And also comments left below the video versions on YouTube, BitChute, Odyssey and Rumble. The purpose of this video is going to be to follow up on some of the themes and the ideas that I raised in that initial message of a couple of weeks ago, which, to be fair, if we look at it, was mainly asking questions. None of it was me claiming to have the answers about anything. I was posing some of the very biggest questions that you can in life. And you will note I was actively inviting correspondence and ideas in response to what I was throwing out there. And I certainly got that. So what I want to do this time around is read out many of the responses that I got from people out there. Some of the responses chime and correspond entirely with what was on my mind and some of the things that I was expressing. Others contradict them. Others bring new perspectives to the table which I'd not considered. And I really hope that people will find it useful to delve into this rich cocktail of different views and ideas. So it's certainly food for thought. It certainly beats the football. It certainly beats last night's EastEnders. It certainly beats worrying about what ready meal from Lidl you're going to have for your dinner. So before I get into the correspondence, there's just a few points I want to address. First off, there were a couple of response videos made to mine by a couple of guys who identify as Christians. So one of them was a guy named Nigel Watson. And all in all, I feel Nigel did a fairly reasonable job of assessing from his perspective the questions that I was raising and some of the points I was making. Of course, Nigel was coming from a Christian perspective, so he was framing everything within that system, much reference to the Bible and the teachings of Jesus and such. But overall, I feel Nigel did a fair job. The other video was made by a guy named Marty Bucko. Now, Marty and I don't actually know each other. We've only met once. This was in March last year, when Marty was co-curating an event with Tim Baisley of Fair Play Now. And Marty and Tim invited me along to this hotel in Stony Stratford, just outside Milton Keynes, to be a guest speaker at this event alongside John O'Looney and various others. So I met Marty that day, shook his hand, said hello. That's pretty much all there was to it. A few weeks ago, I got another invitation from Tim to come and speak at another event that he was co-curating with Marty. And this was to be again in March, the 9th of March, somewhere in the West Midlands. So put that in the diary, all was looking good. Made the video that I made, A few days afterwards, I got an email from Tim explaining that Marty no longer wanted me to be a part of that event because apparently my spiritual religious stance was not in keeping with his as a devout Christian, and he no longer felt that he wanted to provide a platform for me. This is despite the fact that I was not due to be speaking about any of the issues that I'd raised in that video. I was going to be speaking about my usual subjects, which is the true nature of the music industry, social engineering, mind control, things of this nature. So that event got dropped. Now this is a very strange thing to me, because Marty, in the video that he made, reinforces that he is a Christian. That's how he identifies. Now, I laboured under the delusion that I was a born-again Christian for 4 years in the early 90s. It's a long time ago now, because I left in 1994, but I can still remember enough to recall some of the teachings of the Bible, some of the teachings of Jesus, which Christians are taught. One of them involves forgiveness, if I recall. Reminds me of a great sketch by the late great Bill Hicks, which he told once, an anecdote where he'd done a gig in the Bible Belt in one of the southern states in the US. And he'd finished the gig and gone out to the car park, and he's packing up, and these couple of guys come up to him, a couple of redneck hicks, and they're like, "Hey buddy, we didn't like what you said about Jesus in there." And so he turns around to him and says, "So, forgive me." A question which Christians themselves often raise is, what would Jesus do? So my question to Marty and any other Christians would be, what would Jesus have done in Marty's situation if he'd booked me to appear at an event, didn't like what I'd said in one of my videos? Would he have cancelled the gig, no questions asked, and then put out a video criticising what I'd had to say and saying how sad it was that I was asking such questions and that my life seemed to be going in that direction? Or is it more likely that Jesus would have attempted to reach out to me? It's not that difficult to find my email address, my phone number, to reach out to me and to extend a hand of kindness, of friendship, and to see if I wanted to discuss the matter, to talk things through before taking the drastic measure of dropping me from the bill, no questions asked. I think Jesus would have preferred to have had some sort of discourse of that nature. To me, the way this event turned out just reinforces everything that is wrong with organised religions. They are, to all intents and purposes, another expression of the control system. Societal mind control by any other name. No different to government, no different to any other sources of authority, no different to political systems like communism, fascism, socialism, whatever it may be. Doesn't matter what label you put on the religion. The very word religion is derived from a Latin verb, religare. What it means is to bind, or to hold back, or to thwart from forward progress. This is a fact. This is real. You can look it up. You can check it out. The word religion literally means to hold back, to bind, to prevent from forward progress. Aren't we being told right there in the very name what these systems were set up to do? The clues are always in the name. When you get into etymology, you break down the original meanings of so many terms that we use every day. You can get right back down to their origins, how they came about in the first place. So that's what religion is. I'm not making this video to offend any Christians. If they get offended, then they get offended. I'm not trying to offend any Muslims, any Hindus, any Buddhists, or any other name you might care to put on a religious identity. To me, it doesn't matter what name the systems carry, what their holy book may be called, what it may even preach. It all comes down to the fact that religions have been set up to keep people steeped in concrete-minded methods of thought. And Marty's video just demonstrated this. I know he started out wearing one of my t-shirts and holding up my books as if to say, look, I've supported Mark in the past, and I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful for him and Tim bringing me along to that event last year. Tim, by the way, has no problem with me, and we're cool, just to put that on the record. So I'm grateful to Marty for the support, and he mentioned that he's found value in the work that I've done on the music industry. But it's interesting, when you get down to big questions in life, spiritual matters, metaphysical matters, it really does seem to set the cat among the pigeons. This is the type of subject which really sets people apart, unfortunately. And yet, there are no bigger questions that we can ask. There are no bigger and more important considerations than what these lives really are, who we are, what we're doing here, what created us, how we got here, and where we're going when we leave, what lies beyond. And unfortunately, organised religions, with all their dogma, all their rules, all their regulations, and I know, I went to a Christian church for 4 years, I was trained to study the Bible, I was taught that everything that you ever need to know is within the covers of that book. A book which David Icke is fond of describing as having been written by who knows who knows when, who knows where, in who knows what circumstances. We don't know. None of us were there. So Marty seems to have taken the video that I did very personally to heart, as if it was an attack on him, almost. He made reference to my Lord, my Saviour, as if he's got the monopoly on God or Jesus. And this is an interesting thing. I know I mentioned in the video that I went to a Christian evangelical church for 4 years, but I've only received backlash from offended Christians. I knew this was going to be the case, but I've not received any emails or messages from offended Muslims, offended Hindus, offended Jews, offended Buddhists, or anything else. Only lots of offended Christians. I note that Marty did not attempt to address any of the questions that I raised in my video, like why do so many bad things happen to ostensibly good people? I know all about free will. I know all about the idea that this is a schoolhouse where our spirit souls come to learn lessons and attain growth. I've heard all of that. I've been studying that for the past 10 to 15 years. Those weren't the kind of answers I was looking for. I was looking for something a bit deeper. I want to comprehend why it is that there seems to be a direct correlation between the amount of good work that you try and put into the world and the amount of suffering, hardship, and misery that you reap as a direct result of having done so. Quite a few people have backed me up in that assertion, saying that this has been their own personal experience. And isn't this what we're supposed to do as truth seekers? If that's what we say we are? Aren't we supposed to test ideas? Isn't that the scientific method? And this can be tested. You observe, you measure, you repeat, just like scientists do when doing experiments. You can try this for yourself. Try doing good work, trying to help others, standing in right action, doing what you know to be right for creation, considering humanity as a whole, considering other living sentient beings, and see what happens to you. See what happens to you when you stick your head above the parapet and go public with uncomfortable information, exposing the true nature of the insidious, evil control system that we have presiding over humanity, exposing the methods and the tactics that they use, exposing how mind control works, exposing child sex trafficking. How about that? How about going all the way and discussing all that stuff? So-called elite pedophilia. Try blowing the whistle on senior public recognizable figures who are involved in that kind of activity with the evidence to back it up, and see what happens to you. See if your life is all sweetness and joy and you get blessed by the Creator, by God. You're rewarded in this life for trying to expose evil, trying to put a stop to it, trying to shine the light on it. Or see whether the opposite happens, and all you reap instead is a whole world of shit. I tell you what it is that tipped me over the edge when I made that video. What pretty much inspired me to do it, really. I mean, I've been going through some personal situations myself, which I'm not going to discuss because they're just that personal. And I know I'm very far from alone because many of my friends tell me they're going through similar struggles. And people that I don't know message me every day to tell me similar things. But I got a message. I was pretty late to the party with this one. I only caught up with it a few weeks later, but I saw a video that had been made on Christmas Eve by my dude Diesel Automatic, conscious rapper based out in Montenegro. And he was talking about his fellow conscious rapper, Joe Murray. So Joe is out of New York State, I believe. He's a phenomenal conscious rapper, incredibly gifted lyricist, and he's a great guy. He understands right action, natural law, objective morality, and he stands in all of that. He's made many great records with Diesel Automatic exploring these themes. Joe is a good dude. He's trying to do the right thing, and he doesn't deserve what's happened to him. So in this video that Diesel put out, this was the first I knew of it. He revealed how Joe has been going through horrendous personal health issues over the past year or so, probably more than a year now. He's really been put through the ringer. He seems to have some kind of extremely rare and very difficult to identify condition involving his spinal column. Very complicated. I'm no doctor, but apparently fluid has been getting backed up in his spinal column and has been getting sent back up into his head. This isn't the raising of the chrism oil. This is something different. This is fluid that is supposed to go down the column, I guess, and not get sent back up to the brain. But because it has, it's been causing horrendous migraine-like headaches, which Joe's been suffering from day and night for the best part of a year. Imagine that. No rest, no reprieve, day and night, not being able to sleep. Imagine that level of suffering. Now, does a man who has put his life on the line to try and help others and spread empowering messages to uplift all of humanity deserve that as a result? Not in my book. I think from the point of view of any genuinely loving, benevolent, caring God, the way we like to think of God, that is not the sort of condition that somebody should find themselves in. Meanwhile, here's an image which came into my mind the same day, which also inspired that video. Matt fucking Hancock. On that TVAM show, what was it, 2021? Fake laughing, fake crying, wiping away a tear that wasn't there, as he announced that the Convid arm spear was finally being rolled out and made available to the general public, and that the first individual to have taken it was an old guy by the name of William Shakespeare. As in, it was all fiction. Matt Hancock was having a laugh at your expense and mine and everyone else's. Laughing at the imminent rollout of a program which he would have known was going to kill and seriously maim untold millions of people and devastate and tear apart families for generations to come. What kind of sickening abomination of humanity is capable not only of presiding over a program like that, but of going on TV and laughing about it, taking the piss, mocking people to their face as they face their doom? Is Matt Hancock suffering in the same way as Joe Murray? Not as far as I know. Is Matt Hancock ever going to stand trial and go to jail for his crimes against humanity? Wouldn't have thought so. Way more likely that he will die peacefully in his bed, an old man, just slip away, pass away, very little pain, no suffering. Does he deserve that? Well, again, not in my book. But I'm not running the show here, am I? Someone or something else is. And we do have a world in which the Matt Hancocks and the Chris Whitties and the Boris Johnsons and the Anthony Faucis and the Bill Gateses just seem to get away with it their entire lives. Nothing ever happens to them. Meanwhile, so many good men and women who do care, who do have a conscience, who are standing up and trying to do the right thing, only reap suffering as a result. And this dynamic is only ramping up. The suffering is becoming more intense. And those getting away literally with murder is becoming more intense and more obvious as well. So that's the world we have. And this is fact. And no kind of biblical passage is going to explain why that's the case. The Bible was not meant as a literal history book. You weren't meant to read it and go, oh, there was a dude called Jonah who once lived, and he was swallowed by a whale, and he lived in the whale's belly for 3 days, and then the whale spat him out, and that was that. You weren't meant to conclude that there was a dude named Noah who was told to gather 2 of every animal onto this massive boat that he must build called an ark, and there was a massive flood and everyone and everything else perished except Noah and the animals on his ark, and then they repopulated the earth. It's not a literal story. These stories are metaphors and parables. They are designed to convey meaning, and I'm not saying that the Bible is worthless. I think there is a lot of value to it. But again, going back to what David Icke says, we don't know who really wrote it, and we don't know what it was intended to achieve. It's been revised so many times. How do we know that what we've got now is an accurate depiction of events, or is even what that book once was. So there are things we can take away from it, but it doesn't contain all the answers that we seek. So for somebody like Marty Bucko or any of these other fundamental Christians to claim that they're all offended because I said things they didn't like about Jesus and their God, but not to address the big questions and not to be able to come back at me with a response to the questions that I raise, doesn't achieve a whole lot. It's closed-mindedness. These people don't want to address uncomfortable truths, i.e. why so many bad things happen to so many good people. They'd prefer to just write it all off as, oh, the will of the Lord, and it's not our place to question his plan and all this kind of stuff. It's a simple-mindedness. It's childish. And it's also cowardly because it's not facing up to things which should be faced up to and should be questioned and should be asked. And that's what I'm doing here. And evidently a lot of people did find value in that video. So I'm going to get on to the correspondence shortly, but that's all I really want to say about that. The event was cancelled. It is what it is. I've actually replaced it already. So instead, on Saturday 9th of March, I'm going to be in Tisbury, which is, got to check it on the map actually, but it's somewhere down Stonehenge Way, sort of Salisbury-ish, Wiltshire. And it's going to be an all-day event featuring myself and a couple of other speakers, I believe. So check my events page for that, djmarkdevlin.com/events. I'll put the full details up on there. But yeah, already replaced it. So I'll be in Tisbury on the 9th of March instead. A few other things I just wanted to mention before I get into the feedback. I mean, where I'm at right now, at the very start of 2024, just feels like one of these major paradigm shifts in my life. So I mentioned in the previous video, I've been through these different phases. I was an atheist for a while, born again Christian for a while. Then I went into my sort of spiritual phase, but difficult to label it, where I accepted that there is a creative force. I still accept that. You have to. You can't deny that. I'm not an atheist. Let's, make this clear. I'm not slipping back into my atheistic ways. It's obvious that there was some creative, generative force. It's self-evident. We're here. Something created it, therefore. You can call it God, call it what you will, but, the atheistic viewpoint is ridiculous to me. And, I laboured under that delusion for about 15 years or so. So, yes, there's a creative force, but I'm starting to question the nature of it now. It's comforting to think that this force is good and cares for us and wants the best for us. But if we're going to be honest, and if we're going to use that scientific method and test it out, then the results speak for themselves. The results don't tell us that we have a loving God who cares for us. And the better you try and do in life, and the more you consider others, and the more moral you try and behave, the better a time you'll have in life, and the greater your reward. Maybe that reward lies in whatever lies beyond. Gotta hope so, eh? Maybe it's not all been entirely in vain. I guess we won't know until that day comes for each of us. But just to make the point that this is a major paradigm shift in my life, and I'm re-evaluating my entire worldview at this point. Every time you think you've got it all sorted out, every time you think you've got it all neatly labelled, and you can tuck it away in a compartment of your mind, it seems something comes along to upset the apple cart, doesn't it? Certainly been my experience. Others will wonder why it took me so long to arrive at this point, because I'm starting to question whether what we're living in is some sort of simulation, and people will be saying, oh, where have you been, man? People have been talking about simulation theory for the past 5 or 10 years. You're a bit late to the party. Well, maybe I am. I'm just coming around to this idea that we might not be living in original creation. Maybe this is some kind of overlay which has replaced what was there previously. So it's not what the original God of creation or the Most High originally put in place, but it's some sort of bastardized copy that we find ourselves in, a sort of cheap-ass virtual reality simulation. But that only raises another big question for me. If some entity, and call it the demiurge if you like, going into the Gnostic traditions. The Gnostics believed that there was this entity, this force, which was effectively demonic, which had taken over original creation and plunged us all into some fucked up variant of it. And that the fear-based energy and all the misery and suffering that we undergo generates what's called louche energy, which is feasted upon as a sort of food source by these demonic entities. People will say, why have you only just started coming around to this way of thinking even now? My big question would be, if that's really what has happened, what kind of wonderful God, Most High, would allow its original creation to be hijacked in this way, to be taken over by some demonic entity? I mean, Christians will simplify this and they'll say that Satan, the devil, took what was originally God's and made it his realm. So the earthly realm is Satan's realm. But what kind of God would allow that? If God is all-powerful, all-knowing, all-seeing, then why would it not take steps to prevent its wonderful, beautiful creation from being hijacked in so devastating a way, and to banish that demonic entity? Because surely it would have the power to do so, right? It's God, it's all-powerful, it's omniscient. But evidently that didn't happen. And people will say, oh, it's free will, we consented to come here and experience this. Did we? Why don't we remember then? Why do we get this mind wipe? Certainly in the state of consciousness that I'm in now, I would never have consented to come into this place in any form at any time. This is a hell world. So if I did consent, I don't remember it, and it would have been in a different form of consciousness to the one that I find myself in now. So, yeah, we come to these ideas in our own time, and I've arrived at these ways of thinking when I have, as a result of the studying that I've been doing, the thinking, the musing, the reflecting. But it's interesting because many other people seem to be coming to these ideas at this time as well, independently of me. In my last video, I embedded one at the end by Eric Dubay. And Eric, in some of his recent output, has been raising similar questions to me. These have been independent of each other. I stumbled across Eric's videos at a time when I myself was starting to think in these ways. And by the way, as an aside, Eric and I have since been messaging each other, and we've arranged to do a show together. So we're going to be getting our heads together and discussing many of these issues on a podcast in the very near future. So watch out for that on mine and his platforms. Many other people have told me that they've started thinking recently along these lines as well. So this paradigm shift seems to be something that I'm tapping into rather than something that's just personal and independent to me. And I do seem to have been very effective over the years at tapping into the consciousness of many people that watch these broadcasts. Certainly in 2020, so many people were messaging me and saying, thank you for expressing what you have about the convid nonsense, because you're saying exactly what is on our minds. You're just articulating our very thoughts. So many people are coming around to these reassessments of their lives. I have not turned into a rampant Satanist overnight, despite what some might claim. Very far from it. Whatever I feel about the true nature of this realm and whatever may be presiding over it, it's not going to stop me from doing what I know to be right. So I'm going to continue to conduct myself in my behaviours in a way which I know to be right, in terms of service to the rest of creation, the rest of humanity, and other living sentient beings. So I'm not going to become a hard-nosed, cynical, satanic-minded, selfish bastard. I do feel that this appraisal of the realm in which we live brings about a need for a certain degree of self-preservation. You do have to take on an element of looking after yourself just that little bit more and taking care of your own business a little bit more. But that's still different from the satanic mindset of doing whatever you want and to hell with the consequences and to hell with the impact that it might have on others. You can still question the nature of God and this reality and be ostensibly a good person. You can still live by a moral code. And I'll be continuing to do that. I'm not going to change in the way that I conduct myself and relate to others. I'm just asking some different questions, that's all. So I think all that having been said, it's about that time to jump into the correspondence. So I'm going to read out a whole load of messages that I've received from people in response to that last video. I'm old school, I may have mentioned this, so I've printed it out. Might not be too great for trees and such, but this is still the way I work. So there's a lot here, and I'm simply going to blaze through what people have written. I'm leaving out the names, so people might not appreciate me putting names to some of these messages, so I'm simply just going to read them out the way they were sent to me. So the first one I'm going to read is what I consider to be the best response that I've had. This one really resonated with me, and I just felt a real connection with the individual that sent this in. So this person wrote, "To me, your questions are totally valid and to the point. Why all the suffering? Why the torture for those who do the right thing? If it's a test, then why make it so convoluted and confusing? I recognize that suffering can bring wisdom of a sort when dealing with the trials and tribulations of this life. But how much is enough to test us through multiple reincarnations? How many times must we go through this torment before we get our pass to freedom? Why the mind wipe every time we're reincarnated? Surely a benevolent creator could make a series of tests of character far more quickly and efficiently, particularly if what is being tested is a basic goodness and a willingness to do the right thing, rather than string it out over many lifetimes, with the only variation being the balance between pain and pleasure and the intensity and duration of the suffering every time we go round. However, on the flip side of this, I feel the need to ask why the demons in charge are constantly trying to kill religious belief around the world, unless there is a benefit to mankind from holding these beliefs. Perhaps religion was placed there by the evil ones just to give false hope and to stop everybody committing suicide immediately to end their torture and thus remove the source of negative energy from the demons. I mean, that's an interesting point. This is me speaking now. Many people consider ending this torture, ending their own lives, I would say. Maybe even most think about it at some point in their lives. But most people don't do it. Something keeps us holding on. Whether it's hope of some sort of reward lying on the other side, or whether we fear some sort of judgment or some sort of punishment for having done so, or we think about the impact that us not being here would have on those around us. Something stops us from doing it, just to make that point. Back to the message. Perhaps religious faith is just a method of control for otherwise free-thinking or rebellious humans. Maybe it's been decided that it should now be eradicated and replaced with shorter-term material pleasures that provide a more ready stream of negativity than that to be derived from the devout. But perhaps it is truly the right way to salvation, and the messages have been so distorted that we constantly misunderstand and misinterpret them. If not, what else do we have? If we follow the David Icke line, we will all eventually, if and when we escape the trap, become part of consciousness, an amorphous mass of consciousness with no individuality, ready to explore the universe, whatever that means. I don't know about you, but becoming a tiny melted down part of an infinite whole doesn't really appeal much to me. Is there peace and harmony in a unified whole? And would we know about it? Or would our personalities and souls just disappear as part of the ingredients of a huge cake blob of joy or whatever? Again, for me, that doesn't seem worth many lifetimes of torment for. Whether Christians, Muslims, and other mainstream religions and their visions of paradise are true or not, I have to say that the picture they paint of heaven, meeting loved ones from the past, eternal peace, beauty, and an absence of pain and suffering, is a lot more attractive than being a drop in the bucket of one vast soul, with no identity to call one's own. Though one has to question whether heaven would become intensely boring with no apparent purpose, unless there is far more to learn and experience. I'm telling you, I've got some great responses right here. These have got to be the most considered pieces of correspondence on the web. I mean, how much deeper can it get? Let's move on to the second one. I agree with your findings in the last video, and I came across the topic of the soul trap around 2 years ago, that we are trapped here and that someone or something is exploiting us energetically seems to me to be the most likely scenario. That we live in an extremely evil world is a fact, and it shows itself. To do something good in this world requires a lot of effort, but even that is no guarantee that it will really succeed. Meanwhile, it doesn't really take much to do something bad. There's nothing different in nature either. Even the animals we think are free are not really any better off than we are. They have to constantly search for food to survive and are constantly in fear that some predator will kill them. This was another point of mine. This is me speaking again here now. Why is it necessary to have a creation, a realm, in which creatures need to hunt down, torture, mutilate, and murder other living sentient beings just in order to survive? And this happens billions of times over every single day. Most people don't give it a thought. But imagine the violence, the pain, the suffering. Why is that necessary? Why could a realm not have been created where it's not necessary for living creatures to have to do this to each other? Back to the message. It is not possible to survive in this world without destroying or killing something. This very concept is inherently evil. Logic itself says that this reality was not created by a loving being. I myself really started to wonder what was going on when my life turned upside down around 2 years ago. I received an incredible amount of bad experience in exchange for my goodness, and was financially harmed at the same time. It was at this moment that I realized that the law of attraction and also karma is pure BS, because by no possible logic should I have experienced the amount of misery that I did. Then I started testing my reality, and still do today. I start each day completely calm, and even though I don't do any specific action that triggers some negative event, it still happens. I know I have no influence on this myself, but something is always putting obstacles in my way. I see reality as it is in the movie The Truman Show, when Truman overlooks the environment he lives in. When he wants to escape from the island, the team on the show always puts new obstacles out for him. Or, like in the movie The Hunger Games, when Katniss in the games retreats to solitude on the edge of the ring, but then the directors of the games bring her back to the centre with artificially induced traps where she's forced to fight for survival. And again, this is me, I've just thought of the cult 1960s TV series The Prisoner with Patrick McGoohan, which was great. Allegorical in nature. People are still puzzling today over the true meaning of it, but if we think about that, McGoohan's character, the prisoner in this village, every time he tries to escape, gets brought back. Memorably in the show, he gets swallowed up by this massive white sort of balloon type ball, which propels him straight back into the village. So even when the will is there to get away from the situation that he's in, there are obstacles placed in his path over which he has no control, which plunge him straight back into it. Just my thoughts there. Finishing off this one, the most frightening thought for me was that this corrupt system, which is carried out in this world with the help of secret organizations, continues in the spiritual world. And everything seems to be true, as above, so below. So she's referring to this idea of the soul trap, very popular at the moment. Right, on to the next one. Yes, this feels like you opened your heart wide open. This is exactly how I feel. I try and I try and I try, but I am Sisyphus who rolls the heavy stone up the mountain only to let it go all the way down again and again and again. It's an endless, torturing trap because we're born in trauma, and in trauma we're being kept till we draw our last breath. I guess I forgot to read the small print when I signed up to this bloody contract back in the days when I thought, well, you know what, I'll give it a go and take on a physical body and go down there and make the experience and do some good in the meantime. But I overlooked the terms and conditions, didn't I? It doesn't help that as a child I was indoctrinated to the core to believe that God is a loving father figure resembling Father Christmas who sees all I do and think and believe and will punish me if I'm a bad girl and reward me if I'm a good one. But the reward is a con in itself, just to reinforce our bending down and taking it where the sun don't shine over and over, because we live in a self-made prison and there's no let up, not ever, till maybe, when we drop out of this earthly uniform, our bodies. Right, so there's plenty more to go, and they're not all necessarily depressing and negative. You know, I've got a mixed bag here of viewpoints, but I'm just going through, first of all, the ones which chime the most with the points that I was making. So don't go and slit your wrists just yet, folks. Somebody's written, God is a wrong'un. I have no novel ideas about what kind of entity could have designed this grotesque experience we are forced to endure. The sadistic imagination involved in its conception and architecture is staggering. I do wonder why the mad inventor bothered to make the physical world so beautiful, though? Why go to all that effort when it clearly despises its inhabitants? I'll speak again here. This has made me think of a visit that I made a few years ago to Iceland. Not the supermarket, the country. Iceland is a staggeringly beautiful nation, island. The geology there is absolutely breathtaking. You've got everything. Icy tundras, forests, volcanoes, valleys, lakes, rivers. Absolutely beautiful. Staggeringly beautiful. Natural beauty. And I've wondered the same thing. How can there be so much breathtaking, awe-inspiring beauty? And go up to the Scottish Highlands, Glencoe, there's another place. The passage through Glencoe. Can there be any more beautiful place on earth? And yet, at the same time, there's all this horror that goes on, all these animals that kill each other every day that I just mentioned. Quite apart from what goes on in the human world, all the genocide and all the lies and deception and the murder and all this crazy stuff, the child abuse. How can you have a world so naturally beautiful where so much evil can also take place? I get duality, I talk about this in my presentations. I comprehend how duality works, how to have one thing, you have to have its polar opposite. You can't have up without there being down. So you can't have good without there being evil. Yes, I comprehend all of that, but still, it just makes me wonder. Anyway, back to the message. More than anything, just the last bit of the previous paragraph, actually, maybe our heartbreak over the violence and destruction of said world is a tasty flavour of louche. More than anything, the realization that sentient beings are born to suffer is so intolerable that it can send you to the edge of madness. Who wants to acknowledge that we're ruled by a violent apex predator who deliberately destroys the world and is obsessed with pain, perverted sex, bodily functions, and death? The notion that we're made conscious so that we're made fully aware of our own suffering, thus compounding the suffering, is truly psychotic, and yet it seems to be encoded in the blueprint for life. The thought of endless reincarnation is horrifying, and the only saving grace is that we don't remember it each lifetime. Eric Dubé's video was brilliant. I looked at the comments on his YouTube channel and despaired. So many religious people were offended. It's going to happen. Why on earth would brainwashed people like that follow him in the first place? By the way, the other day I was doing a crossword while listening to your video tour around Oxford. As you talked about the May Day celebrations, the clue was distress signal, and the answer was May Day. I said out loud, "Are you bloody kidding me? What force could possibly project manage such clockwork synchronicities?" So again, this reinforces the idea of this being some sort of virtual reality simulation. I'll just throw in an anecdote at this point, which I think helps to illustrate what we're talking about. It comes from my parents, and a few years ago they were at a hotel event, and they said they went up to the bar, and this couple of a similar age to them came up next to them at the bar and said, "Oh, hello again." And my parents said, "Oh, sorry, I don't think we know you." And the other couple looked really shocked and puzzled. And they said, "Well, we were just dancing with you in the ballroom next door." And my folks said, "Sorry, no, we weren't in the ballroom next door." And the couple, both of them, were insistent. They said, "Well, no, we were just with you. Like 3 minutes ago, we were talking with you and dancing with you next door." And my parents were like, "Well, I'm sorry, but we've never seen you before." What the hell is that all about? Hopefully not them losing their marbles. I don't think it is. I think there's something else happening. This world is becoming stranger by the day. Okay, on to the next one. Hi Mark, you really nailed the conundrum. I'm still ruminating on this subject, but was reminded of this quote from Carlos Castaneda, who may have been a fraud, but certainly imparted some wisdom on this fucked up plane. So this is a quote from Carlos Castaneda, The Active Side of Infinity. Sorcerers believe that the predators have given us our systems of belief, our ideas of good and evil, our social mores. They are the ones who set up our hopes and expectations and dreams of success or failure. They have given us covetousness, greed, and cowardice. In order to keep us obedient and meek and weak, the predators engage themselves in a stupendous maneuver. Stupendous, of course, from the point of view of a fighting strategist. A horrendous maneuver from the point of view of those who suffer it. They gave us their mind. Do you hear me? The predators gave us their mind, which becomes our mind. The predator's mind is baroque, contradictory, morose, filled with the fear of being discovered any minute now. What I'm saying is that what we have against us is not a simple predator. It is very smart and organized. It follows a methodical system to render us useless. Okay, next message. I came to the same conclusions as in my video during the lockdowns. Basically, that although I accept that we're in some kind of creation, there appears to be no actual evidence of a loving or even benevolent creator. Only something like an Old Testament style psycho god can fit the bill in this world. When I tried to discuss this concept with other people who I thought were open-minded, it was difficult. So it was a huge relief when Eric Dubay released his recent videos. And then you released this one. It was just knowing I'm not alone in coming to this conclusion. Next one. Mate, devout Christians are code for dogmatic Christians. They are programmed not to question and to accept that they are the sinners and to blame for everything. They live in the shackles of the dogma, never realizing that the Bible was never meant to be read literally. It's an allegory with layers of messaging. But when you're under the spell of a priest, you can't see beyond the pew you're kneeling on, repeating mea culpa over and over. Marty has done his audience a disservice by cancelling you. However, I think he cancelled you because his audience, after hearing you, would perhaps question a few things. And no, we can't have Christians questioning, can we? You see, these people are afraid of the truth. They have cognitive dissonance and they've been traumatized to not think, but just listen. And the next message is very short and sweet. Logic alone will tell you the truth about religion. The reason why people believe in a certain religion is because of the place in the world that they, or their parents, or their grandparents were born, quite simply. And they always talk about their ancient texts, but all three religions have their own ancient texts. So he's making the point that you'll be a Muslim if you're born in the Middle East, just because that's what's practiced in that part of the world. And you'll be a Christian, or you could be, in the United States for the same reason. If it had been the other way round, your faith would be the other way round. It's merely an accident of birth. Next message. I don't agree with Marty's comments, and he's making out that you're in a dark place. Well, aren't we all with the state of the world? I would just add that to not be in a dark place is to not be paying attention at this point. We need more truth and action. Having my eyes open to what's happening now for many years, you have to question what God is and how evil is constantly winning. I feel like every day now is a battle, and the more I try to be positive, the worse things get. And I know I'm not the only one. The law of attraction has always been flawed. I remember first watching it in 2007 and being fascinated but skeptical about it. And I've learned that some of the presenters have had shady dealings, so no surprise there. Be positive, stay positive. Amongst all the evil that's being committed every day, it's like closing your eyes and pretending that everything is okay. Next one. The soul is here on the earth plane to know every aspect of itself experientially, which could include the obvious, i.e., peace, love, and joy, and the less obvious, i.e., suffering, generosity, mercy, and forgiveness. The soul really does not care whether the experience is positive or negative. It simply needs to experience them all to achieve the greatest growth. An example would be for the soul to lower its vibration, come to earth, and give a couple of quid to a homeless person to experience generosity. That said, would the greater experience of generosity not be for the soul to come back as a homeless person for a time and receive a few quid and gain a more profound experience of both generosity and mercy? I agree that with regard to reincarnation, the memory and knowledge gained in that life are wiped clean. The thing that you do take with you into the next life is wisdom, which is the accumulation of the growth you've gained in your previous lifetimes. Wisdom is not something you have any memory or knowledge of, as it's innate and intuitive. The only way someone would regress in the next life is if they were decent enough in this life, but for some reason crossed to the dark side. So it's not looking too great for politicians, business leaders, Hollywood actors, musicians, etc. Next one. Told you this is going to be a long one. Hi Mark, you asked for a comment. I sense your anger and disappointment and hope that you can get beyond it. Yeah, me too. Maybe I will. The way I choose to look at life is that we have a non-interventionist God who experiences life through us. Yes, there are psychopaths and evildoers, but we don't know they get away with it all because we don't know what happens after death. I do agree it appears they get away with it while they're here. I see the challenge of life to overcome my own temptation to evil, to integrate the shadow, to overcome my trauma, to gain mastery of my mind, and by abiding by natural law and helping others. I do feel better than I did when I harmed others through my addiction to drugs and alcohol. So this goes back to the point that I was making earlier about how no matter how cynical I may become in my worldview, it's not going to stop me from doing what I know to be right. It's not going to prevent me from conducting myself in a moral kind of way. So I'm still going to abide by the principles of natural law, even if now I've got some questions about whether consequentialism, cause and effect, karma, works in exactly the way I believe that they do up to this point. Let's move on. It's so difficult navigating our way through this thing we call life presently, especially if we're part of the divine tribe who can see, hear, smell, taste, and feel it all. We understand truth at a deep and profound level. It's built into our cells. There are many lessons here, even for us, as we tend to still blame an outside authority for our experiences. Any awake man or woman inner stance that giving our power away to an external authority, government, medical establishment, educational establishment, etc., is detrimental to our spiritual growth, then why would it be any different for a God, a so-called divine entity, a so-called spiritual source? Maybe we are that divine spark, or God, as a collective, made up of individualized personas and soul essences. As each individual finds their way back into full consciousness, we free the collective back into unity and balance. So that viewpoint is the closest to the one that I've held for the past several years, I would just add, from the various different ones we're exploring here. Next one, I wanted to share my experience with you, and I hope it's useful. What I see you struggling with is all based on the mind's fabrication of reality. I found that the mind is in fact the root of the suffering. Trying to make sense of this world will only further entangle and trap you in the mind. What the mind perceives is only useful for basic functions in this world, and we must stay aware of its limitations. Otherwise, it keeps us blind and remains a hindrance for most of our lives. When we free ourselves from the limits of the mind, we can then keep the experience pure and true, an equanimity of sorts. Okay, next one. So here I am, sitting up in bed, 5-something o'clock in the morning, staring out of the window into a black, cold world, trying to think of a belated reply to your question on God. Don't mean to sound melancholy, but after a lifetime of digging for answers, all I've got is more fucking questions, mate. There's not many stones I think I've left unturned over the years of trying to figure it all out. If I'm honest, I've always struggled here, even since I was young enough to remember. I think I mentioned something myself of that nature in the previous video. So getting back to the God-Satan dichotomy, it makes logical sense. Why would an everything consciousness create a lying, vindictive, cruel opposite to battle? I have to agree with yourself and the great Eric Dubay on this. Next message. I got rid of all my beliefs a few years back. Reality is what it is, and nothing I believe will change that reality. Now I stick to what I know. The metaphysical aspect of reality is interestingly and rightly pondered upon, but is ultimately unknowable, at least in this plane of reality. What I do know, though, beyond reasonable doubt, is that some very bad people are doing some very bad things and need to be stopped here, right now, in this physical, three-dimensional world in which we find ourselves. This must be our focus, our sole intent, the one thing we can all surely get behind. God, the shape of the earth and all the rest of it can take care of themselves. They ain't going anywhere. These issues should be put on the back burner until we win this war. Let's not forget that even as we speak, children all over the world are being abused in the most horrific ways. Let's keep our eye on the ball, people, or we will surely die like cowards. Very well said, and I concur wholeheartedly with that. Real world physical action is needed. Whatever the nature of this place is, I think we can all agree, as this writer has stated, that it's fucked up and it needs urgent attention. That does need to be our focus. Next message, nearly at the end now. I, like yourself, have been engrossed within the conspiracy subjects for decades, and perhaps even before that, with all the animal rights activism. But when I came to this realization, it capped all of the knowledge I had accumulated. After a long time unwrapping conspiracies, we soon realize we're in a spiritual war. To me, it is spiritual maturity to wake up to the fact that we are in a hell realm, a type of simulated prison and a potential reincarnation soul trap. It took me decades to realize that we cannot fix this realm. The game is rigged. Also, that there is what I call inverted karma, the exact opposite of New Age karma, in that I'm suggesting that generally good things happen to the shits in this world, and the good guys inevitably suffer. I would refer viewers back to my Joe Murray, Matt Hancock dichotomy of earlier in this video to reinforce that point. Especially to those who stick their head out to share truths, this person concludes, in terms of people that seem to reap bad luck and misfortune. It does seem to be that way. Next one. The only thing that separates us from the evil bastards is our good conscience. That is something their money cannot buy. I believe it's what they envy about us. We can go to the deepest, darkest places and suffer the worst pain and trauma, yet us with good souls still manage to learn from it and come through it as wiser and more learned people. Think about survivors of satanic ritual abuse in that regard, and how they're able to transcend those horrific experiences. How? There's some tenacity of the human spirit there, right? Back to the message. When you have a great conscience, you're in the best team ever, as you actually need very little else apart from the basics. They created a material world, making people believe that they must have this or that to make them happy. But that's not so for us critically thinking, chronically empathic people. The only way that they can get to us is through our children, and we can only save our own by teaching them the gift of common sense thinking. I wonder what would happen if, instead of us being so angry and shocked with what is happening, we all just laughed at how ludicrous and transparent it all is. Well, that's what these guys do, right? Sheep farm. And very welcome it is too, because the world is so ridiculous and absurd that you do sometimes just have to laugh at it. Rise above. Lance and them do a great job of that as well. This person writes, I'm not ready to laugh just yet, so I'm working on this one. But when I do laugh, it's usually like a hysterical maniac, so it needs some work. Next message. I think you are bang on the money, and I don't blame you in the slightest for feeling somewhat despondent. For 99.9% of humanity, life is and always has been a shitty and uphill struggle. You describe the experience of life as being like in a torture chamber, and this is simply the reality of what we are all put through. There's never been a time when the mass of humanity hasn't been enslaved by one tyrannical regime or another. Never. In my view, the Bible, scriptures, belief systems that have been around for thousands of years are and were simply control constructs invented by those in charge to hoodwink us into believing that we were born to suffer because it's God's will. Actually, no, it's their will. But don't worry, guys, if you're all good little boys and girls, i.e. don't push back against us, then you'll get your reward when you snuff it. Whether that's sitting next to God or getting your 20 virgins, or whatever lies your particular belief system promulgates, in the 21st century, nothing has changed on this front, has it? For me, God and Satan are one and the same. I asked a Ouija board to tell us the difference between God and Satan. The glass, which was moving by itself at this point, spelled out they are the same and promptly shattered. The most blood-chilling moment of my entire life. Interestingly, other people have told me this as well, that they've been messing with Ouija boards, not something I've chosen to do myself, but they've asked that very question. What is the difference between God and Satan? And the board has replied, they are the same, effectively. That's the message that's come back. So we're back to this idea of duality. You can't have one thing without its polar opposite being possible and present. So for God to exist, there has to be an adversary, which we might call Satan. Like you, I struggle to see the point in existence, given that there clearly isn't a God who would idly sit by and watch all the evildoers in the world not only going about their demonic business unchallenged, but profiting handsomely in the process. This isn't to say that there can't be some form of creator. Well, clearly there is, as I mentioned earlier, because we're here. Something created us. But it just doesn't follow that said creator is benevolent, because where is the proof for this? There isn't any, is there? I'm sorry, but the concept of blind faith simply isn't good enough. And again, this is what religious believers, followers are programmed, entrained, conditioned to go into. Blind faith. Don't ask questions, just believe us. Have trust, have faith. If you lack faith, then you won't go to heaven. Sorry, God doesn't want you. If you don't believe what this minister tells you or what this book tells you, then there's no place for you in heaven. It's the other place for you, old son. Right, final paragraph of the final message. I don't know why we're here any more than you do. I have to believe there's a point to all this, because otherwise we would all surely crumble under the weight and pressure of everyday life and probably top ourselves. So there must be a reason why we keep plodding along against seemingly unsurmountable odds. Yes, the human spirit or essence is indomitable. But as you rightly say, living our lives in the pursuit of love, kindness, and right action hasn't really worked in our favour, has it? But there must be a point. I'd love to know what it is. Wouldn't you? And I think that's a pretty good note on which to end these messages. So that lot are literally only a small fraction of the amount of messages, replies that I've received over the past couple of weeks. So if you've sent one in and I've not replied to you, it's because it's simply been physically impossible for me to do so, to stay on top of this huge number. I do normally pride myself on replying to all messages I receive, but sometimes it just becomes impractical. And I suspect that the virtual mailbag for this one is going to be even more out of control than it was for the original video. I do welcome responses, so even if I can't get through them all, and even if I'm not able to offer individual replies, do feel free to comment in the video section below this on whatever platform you might be viewing it on, or send me an email to markdevlin2022@protonmail.com. I would just say the same thing as I said last time to reinforce the point. I don't want to hear from any orthodox religious types. I don't want to hear about what this Holy Scripture says or what 2 Corinthians passage 13 says or anything like that, because I've been there already, and as we mentioned earlier in this video, these religious systems amount to nothing more than mind control. Also, I don't need to hear about how we consented to come into physical form when we were in the spirit world and we agreed and went into soul contracts with others to undergo these experiences, because I've heard all that before as well. I'm very familiar with those teachings. I'm very interested in new perspectives, new viewpoints, which don't fall into those categories and which don't generally get discussed in conversations of this nature. So I'll leave that one there. This is probably the longest of these video messages that I've ever done. And I want to round it off by just mentioning a few sort of housekeeping points and to mention a few other things that I've got going on. So the first one is going to involve me taking a gulp of this cup of tea. I am an Englishman. I love my tea. I don't get the infatuation with coffee, and that cup of tea has been sat on my desk for a long time staring at me. So that sip was overdue. I want to talk about the Patreon channel that I've just started. So this is going to offer exclusive video content to my Patreon supporters in the form of 3 videos each month, which won't get released on my regular video platforms. So you just get these on the Patreon. So it's a very small cost. It amounts to around about $10 US, because the way Patreon is structured, it's sort of in American dollars. That equates to about 7 or 8 British pounds. And for that each month, if you choose to support me, you can get these 3 exclusive videos. So the first one that I posted to kick off the Patreon channel, it's only been running for a few days, was my Beatles tour of Hamburg hotspots. So a couple of weekends ago, I went to Hamburg, Germany, following in the footsteps of the Beatles in those formative years where they were slogging away on the music circuit of that particular city. And I tracked down many of the clubs that they performed in. They're all situated just off the Reeperbahn area of Hamburg, which is a very seedy, very sort of gritty part of town. And they're pretty much all in one street as well, Große Freiheit. So it was many of the clubs that the Beatles performed at, so we're told, and also the digs that they used to lodge in the Bambi Kino cinema, just at the back of that street. So I do a little video tour, show you what these spots look like now. The incredible thing is that most of the music clubs are still operational as music clubs, some 6 decades on. So that was the first video for my Patreons. And the other 2 that I'll be releasing this month consist of the 2 parts of my Dark Occult Aspects of Queen presentation. So that's the group Queen, not the deceased monarch. And it's looking at esoteric and occult aspects of that particular band. This is a presentation which I delivered in Newcastle this weekend just gone, and prior to that in Cleethorpes in December, and I decided to sit down and recreate that presentation in a desktop format, and that's released in 2 parts on the Patreon. I want to make clear that if you choose to support me via the Patreon, this is a way of you helping my work to continue. It's a way of people who have found value in my output just showing some appreciation and paying it back. It is, of course, entirely voluntary. And if you choose not to become a Patreon supporter, then my regular video content will continue. I mean, this video that you're watching right now is being made available entirely for free across my YouTube, Odyssey, BitChute, and Rumble. And so my regular output will continue, all the good vibrations, all the other interviews that I do, but there will be exclusive content just for the Patreon supporters as an extra method of them, donating towards the work that I do. So I want to thank everyone that signed up to the Patreon so far. If you want to get involved, the link to it is in the notes below. I am looking at doing a brief speaking tour of the US East Coast in April of this year. So this is going to involve 4 talk events very similar in nature to what I did in Australia in November just gone. It just occurred to me that there would be a lot of value in bringing the information that I generally talk about. The events are going to be titled Music's Military and mind control connections to an American audience who might not be that familiar with what I've been speaking about for the past several years. Pretty sure UK audiences are, but perhaps not so much in the United States. So the idea is to hit 4 cities in very quick succession. It's going to be Boston, it's going to be New York City, it's going to be Philadelphia, and with any luck, New Haven, Connecticut, if I can make it happen. There are, of course, huge costs involved in embarking on a tour of this nature. I'm going to have to pay the higher fees to the venues that I'll be using. I'm going to have to get my arse out to the United States in the first place, from London, of course. There's going to be ground transportation between the different cities. There's going to be lodging and accommodation costs. There's going to be food, drink, daily expenses. And so if anyone is in a position to assist me in meeting some of these upfront costs, I've got a crowdfunder which is currently running. Now, I've mainly got American audiences in mind for this who might be able to get along to one of these events and be there in person. So if you feel that you can benefit from one of these and you're able, in a position to comfortably assist me in meeting some of these costs, then if you feel to make a donation to the crowdfunder, that would be greatly appreciated. Not really asking people from outside of the US to donate unless they specifically want to. It's a matter of individual choice. But for anyone who can afford to do so, the crowdfunder is now open, and anything that people can offer to help me meet these costs and make this tour become a reality would be greatly appreciated. And I hope to see lots of American crowds out there in April. Got some shows upcoming. I mentioned the one with Eric Dubay, where we'll be getting into the main subject area of this video. I've got one coming very soon as part of Good Vibrations with Alan of Salisbury, talking about the occult art of law, getting into some word magic, legalese, getting into the idea of contracting and consenting, which ties into natural law and ideas of karma and things of this nature. So that would be a great one. I'm going to be jumping on a show with Ben Emlyn Jones in Oxford. Lives just down the road from me, and of course Oxford is the city where I set my new novel, The Gift and the Curse. So Ben has invited me onto his Hapanwo radio show to talk about some of the places that are featured in this book, in the story, and some of the inspiration for me writing the thing in the first place. Ben is someone who knows Oxford very well, so it's only right that we have a discussion about this most fascinating of cities, given that it is, of course, Illuminati Central right here in England. And another thing that I want to be doing is on Friday, 22nd of March, 223, or 322 if you want to reverse it, I want to be hosting a walking tour of the centre of Oxford, taking a small group of interested people around many of the hotspots which feature in my The Cause and the Cure and The Gift and the Curse novels. So I'm going to be explaining which parts of the story take place in which locations. Ben is going to be along to assist because he knows a lot about Oxford, and also Tony Chin is going to be a part of that hopefully as well. So if anyone can make it into Oxford on the evening of Friday 22nd of March, we're probably going to kick off at about 6 p.m. and it'll probably last for maybe an hour and a half, something like that. Then keep an eye on the events page of my website, djmarkdevlin.com/events, and as soon as I officially announce that event, you'll be able to book your place on it. Should be a very interesting evening. I've selected 322, of course, because of its occult significance. It's the spring equinox, but also 322 is the number associated with the Skull and Bones Mystery School Secret Society fraternity in Yale University. So it's just a nice little nod from me, not representing evil or darkness in any way, but standing for the opposite, and a little sort of middle finger to the dark occultists in taking one of the dates that they hold dear and using it for a different purpose. So yeah, 322 it is for that one. And wouldn't it be great if I get to do a talk in New Haven, Connecticut, given that it's the home of Skull and Bones and Yale. It'd be more sort of shining light on a place associated in many ways with darkness and control. Other events coming up, I've got plenty in the UK throughout February and March. Many of those are loaded onto my events page already, and upcoming ones will be there in due course. Plenty of summer stuff going on as well. Many festivals and many great looking events for the summer months. Can't wait for those. I really come alive during the spring and summer. I think that's about it for now. Wow, that was a marathon video, wasn't it? So might be a while until I do the next one, but keep an eye on all the various platforms and definitely keep an eye on the comments section because I've got a feeling this one is going to run for a while yet. Cheers for now.